Dr. Catherine Wente is going to be our next presenter. She is a colleague of mine, a mentor, and a friend. And she has spoken on several occasions for the local chapter. And we want to welcome her to the podium, and she can give you her long list of CV that she has. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, good afternoon, y'all. I'm Catherine Wente. I'm faculty at Campbell Pharmacy School, and I worked with Paula at Duke Regional. I've now moved a little closer to Campbell campus and am practicing at Central Harnett Hospital, which is a smaller hospital. But I started out as a pharmacy technician trainee this was my first job ever, in 1996. So that's where I got my beginnings. I kind of stumbled onto it. It was the summer after my freshman year in college, and my parents were like, you need to get a job. And so I was like, well, okay. And they said, well, but if you can work for our local independent pharmacist, then you can work there for free. So, I'm an extroverted introvert, so the thought of, working in the mall or working in fast food or anything, super rowdy was not ideal for me. And so I wanted something a little bit more sheltered and a little bit more secure, and something that was going to help me with my goal of getting into pharmacy school. So I went to our local pharmacist and I said, hey, I'm from a small town, by the way. I'm from West Virginia. I'm from a small town. My parents are teachers, so they know everybody. And I had met this pharmacist when I was in 8th grade. And so I popped into her pharmacy and I said, hey, my parents say I need to get a job this summer, but they said if I could come and work for you, I could work for free. And she said, well, I've got a pharmacy student coming to intern this summer, but they need somebody across the street at the hospital. Well, I didn't know anything about hospital pharmacy. I was like, okay, fine, I'll give it a try. And so I ended up with a job as a hospital pharmacy technician, never having set foot in a hospital pharmacy, but I did that on summers and breaks until I got into pharmacy school, and I switched and became a pharmacy technician an intern for CVS Pharmacy. So I have worked in hospital pharmacy as a technician. I've worked in retail pharmacy as a technician. I did that all through pharmacy school. And then when I became a pharmacist, I still continued to work in hospital pharmacy and retail pharmacy. So now I've got, my 2 jobs are in academia and in hospital pharmacy, but I still have 2 jobs, like a lot of us do. So that's kind of my background and why I love talking to pharmacy technicians. I also, whenever Paula asks me to do something, I just say yes. So, and she knows it too. So I'm happy to come talk to y'all today about diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of the things that I do for Campbell is I'm a member of our Multicultural Council for the university. This coming year, I have the pleasure of being co-chair for that group, and I'm a faculty advisor for 2 of our diversity, equity, and inclusion student groups in the College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences. We have a dedication to representation student group, and then we also have a pride in healthcare student group, and I serve as advisor for both of those. So I do a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and do a lot of DEI talks, and it's something that is near and dear to my heart. So this is an interactive talk, so be prepared to say some things and contribute. We're going to talk about some common terms and concepts associated with diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're going to talk about ways to foster an atmosphere of belonging that's conducive to an inclusive and productive workplace. And we're going to talk about how to address barriers to diversity, equity, and inclusion as derived from some case-based scenarios that we're going to go through. So first of all, like I said, this is interactive. So if you'll just with a show of hands, how many of you practice in hospital? Ooh, a lot of y'all. Okay. Community? Handful of folks. How many of y'all practice in a clinic? Okay, some folks over here. Industry? You used to be in industry. Okay. Administration and management. Okay. Academia. Anybody also teach? Okay. All right. My fellow academicians out there. Any other things that we haven't covered? Any other practice sites or areas? Okay. So just think about that, because I'm going to ask you some questions having to do with that in a little bit. So this is a definition of diversity. There are lots of definitions of diversity. This is one of my favorite ones because it's pretty all-encompassing. So the range of human differences, including but not limited to race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, social class, physical ability or attributes, religious or ethical value system, national origin, and political beliefs. So I really like this definition. The thing that kind of makes me laugh about it is it says, but not limited to, but then it lists absolutely every single way that we could all be different from one another, whether it's age, physical ability, or attributes. Those are some of the things that we don't think about as much. But this is a pretty all-encompassing definition of diversity. So equity, this is my favorite equity picture. So when you look at this, in this first picture, everybody's trying to see the game, but everybody's got a box. Whether they need a box or they don't need a box, everybody has the same thing. So the tall person can see over the fence. The medium height person can also see over the fence, but the shorter person, who is a child, can't see over the fence, but everybody's got a box. That's equality. Everybody's being treated equally. You're not looking at what people actually need, just everybody gets a box. In the second picture, people are given what they actually need. So the tall person who doesn't need a box doesn't get a box. The medium height person gets one box and can see over, and then the child gets two boxes, and so now they can see the baseball game too. So that's being treated equitably. So everybody's actually got what they need. But then the third picture, this is the dream. This is inclusion. So in the third image, everybody can see without a box because the fence is gone. So the barrier that was keeping them from being able to see the game in the first place is no longer there. So that's what we want to get to. There are some cases where, we're in the everybody gets a box situation. Other places where we're in everybody's got what they need, but the place that we really want to get to is we don't have any barriers at all and everybody is included. And so speaking of inclusion, and this is my favorite part of diversity, equity, and inclusion work is the inclusion portion, because we have the diversity. The diversity just naturally exists in our world today, but the equity and inclusion are the things that we're really working on. So inclusion is a practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized, such as members of minority groups and or those who have physical or mental disabilities. So we think about these things and think about, okay, how accessible is this? How accessible is this to someone in a wheelchair? How accessible is this to someone on crutches? I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. So I've been through that stroller phase twice. And so having to figure out and, navigate things with like a giant, 3-wheeled all-terrain stroller, made me think about, okay, what if I were in a wheelchair? How much longer does it take me to get everywhere? So, just putting yourself in other people's shoes and thinking about, okay, is this really accessible? How accessible is it? Yes, we've built a ramp, but it's all the way over on the other side of the building. So thinking about those sorts of things, thinking about how you can be inclusive, and putting yourself in other people's shoes. So those are our 3, foundation definitions. There are some other things to dig a little bit deeper. So we're going to talk a little bit about bias and stereotyping. So the definition of bias is tendency to believe that some people, ideas, etc., are better than others, and it usually results in treating some people unfairly. Stereotyping is to believe unfairly that all people or things with a particular characteristic are the same. So just inferring attributes onto a group of people when really those may not be the attributes that they have. So stereotyping can be positive or negative. There are positive stereotypes about different groups, and there are negative stereotypes about different groups. But we'll talk a little bit about, culture and what's unique to individuals and things like that as we go on. So how many of y'all have ever taken an implicit bias test as part of your work or activities? Okay, one person, couple people, all right. A handful of folks. So Harvard has been doing this for years and years and years, and this is the link for it. And there are a lot of different implicit bias tests on there. There's skin tone, gender, career, women in science. There's one about presidents. There's like a dozen of these. There's one on age and ability. And so these are really good tests to take to kind of be able to observe your bias, understand places where you may have some areas for improvement and things like that. So this is a good exercise to do as part of diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So this is my favorite diagram. And I really like to talk about this because it helps us to kind of figure out where we are on this continuum of cultural competence, and understanding that you may be really competent about your own culture. You may be really competent about cultures that you have been exposed to and come into contact with on a regular basis, but you may have some gaps and some blind spots in other cultures that you have not been exposed to, that you're not familiar with. And I mean, even for me, there are certain cultures that I just don't know as much about as others. So moving along this continuum of cultural competency is something that we, should be working on for a lifetime. So the beginning is, not a good place. Cultural destructiveness. So this is forced assimilation. Only the dominant groups have any rights and privileges. So the example of this is slavery. So that's cultural destructiveness. You're destroying someone else's culture, not just ignoring it, but actually actively destroying it. Cultural incapacity. So this is maintaining stereotypes, bias in hiring practices, racism, segregation is also an example of cultural incapacity. So cultural blindness, this is where a lot of people are. And it's okay if this is where you are, as long as you are, continuing to work along this continuum. This is where the people who say, I don't see color are. This is where everybody gets the same box. Everybody gets a box whether they need a box or not. So you're not really recognizing the differences amongst people. You treat everybody the same, but you only meet the needs of the dominant group. So everybody gets the same thing, but only the dominant group is deciding on resources, opportunities, availability, things like that. And so people who say, I don't see color, that's the cultural blindness. Because if you don't see color, if you don't see culture, then that means that you're not seeing the entirety of an individual. And that can be just as damaging as cultural incapacity, potentially. So just understanding that I don't see color is not actually the right approach, and you need to keep moving along on the continuum. So the next step is cultural pre-competence. So now you're seeing color. You're exploring cultural issues. You're assessing the needs of the organization and individuals. And then cultural competence, you're recognizing individual and cultural differences. You're actively seeking advice from diverse groups. You're hiring and fostering an environment of diversity, and hiring and fostering culturally unbiased staff. And that can be through providing education, like things like this, and then also setting this as part of your organization's mission and vision. And some organizations do a much better job of that than others. It also depends on your resources, the amount of money that you have, how much you're able to move into cultural competence and cultural proficiency. So for example, for me, when I was at Duke Regional and working in Duke Health System, oh my goodness, Duke has so much money to throw around towards diversity, equity, and inclusion and all of these things. And then I look at Campbell and this tiny little university that I work at out in sort of the middle of nowhere in Bowie's Creek, North Carolina. We don't have that. We don't have that money. We don't have all of these resources to throw at diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it's figuring out what works for where you are and doing the best that you absolutely can, but recognizing those differences, being active about it, seeking guidance, and hiring people, fostering that community, and being able to meet people where they are. And then cultural proficiency, this is the dream. So implement changes to improve services based on cultural needs. So do you need to move your ramps for people who are disabled so that they're closer to everybody else's access to the building? Do you need to change your dress code so that it's no longer gender specific? Is it really necessary to have a gender-specific dress code that says women need to wear this and men need to wear this? It's not really necessary. So thinking about the ways that you can serve people, meet them where they are, and looking at places where there's division and there doesn't need to be division. So as far as representation, so the National Institutes of Health actually has a really nice website about diversity, equity, and inclusion and representation. So the NIH says that the following groups are considered to be underrepresented in health sciences and in healthcare. So for me, one of the things that I do for Campbell is I'm part of our admissions committee. And I'm part of our admissions committee for pharmacy school, but I also help with admissions for our physician assistant school as well because I teach there too. And so one of the things that we really work on, especially in PA school, like in pharmacy school, we've got a ton of diversity at Campbell these days. It's wonderful. So we've created this diverse environment, but now we're working on supporting that diverse environment. Whereas at our physician assistant school, they do not have the diverse environment yet, so that's where they are. So the groups that are considered to be underrepresented, according to NIH, are Blacks or African Americans, Hispanics or Latinos, American Indians, and Alaska Natives. So this is for the entire country. Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders, individuals with disabilities, bless you, and individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds. So this is something that we also need to think about. Who is a first-generation college student? Who is that person who is even the first-generation high school graduate? And thinking about, how do you help foster them, encourage them, and make them feel like they belong? And then underrepresentation can vary from setting to setting. Like I said, there may be some places that are very diverse, like our pharmacy school, very diverse. Our PA school, not so much. So just being able to look around and recognize the gaps and your needs and how you can improve representation. So thinking about that, so I told y'all this is interactive. So think about your workplace and your colleagues. Visualize their names and their faces. Think about what you know about their families and their culture. So how diverse is your workplace now? Very diverse? Just a little bit? Not so much. Okay, 2 thumbs up over there. Okay. So how diverse is your workplace? Super diverse. Oh, yeah. So from everywhere in the world in Houston. Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody not so diverse? Okay, yes. Okay, so. And where are you? Very nice. I've been to Minneapolis. I've been to the Mall of America. Does everybody tell you that when you say Minneapolis? I figured. One of my friends was living in Rochester for a year, so we flew into Minneapolis and did the Mall of America and then drove on down to Rochester. So there are some places that are not as diverse as others. There are some departments that are not as diverse as others. So you'll see, pockets of diversity sometimes, and then places where there's just not as much. And also gender diversity. So, pharmacy is, widely a female-driven field. And so when we see men in pharmacy, it's like, hey. So male technicians, it's like, hey. So because it really is, it's mostly women. So I was happy to see Kevin today. I'm like, hey, how you doing? So pharmacy is just a very female-driven field. When pharmacists, pharmacy technicians, it's mostly women. But then when you look at administration, is it the same or is it different? It's different. So mostly men, when you look at pharmacy administration, pharmacy technician administration, it's more men. So there are these pockets of diversity, and sometimes diversity only makes it so far. So there can be a glass ceiling on diversity as well. So how diverse was your workplace 5 years ago? About the same? 10 years ago? Different. And this is something that I did for our pharmacy school. We do composite photos of our incoming students every year. So I was giving a talk, and I pulled the composite photos from our most recent students, and then I pulled from 5 years ago and from 10 years ago, and we really looked at them. And it really illustrated how much things have changed. And one of my colleagues said, yeah, this is not your mama's pharmacy school. And it's true. I mean, it's not your mama's workforce anymore. We have more diversity, not just gender diversity, not just ethnic diversity. We have people feeling more comfortable being themselves. And so we need to be able to embrace that and meet people where they are. When I was in pharmacy school, it was not okay to have natural hair. And my mom was of that generation where she was just a little bit mortified about my natural hair. So she talked me into straightening my hair for my 4th year of pharmacy school for rotation. She was like, you need to look professional. You need to look professional. And so she talked me into straightening my hair. I straightened my hair. And, now, many, many years later, I'm, back to my locks, started growing these, in March. And then I look on the news and there's, Ketanji Brown Jackson. I'm like, oh, look at her with her hair like mine. So understanding that people are feeling more comfortable being themselves and, creating that environment where people do feel comfortable being themselves, creating an environment where people feel seen. So, how diverse is this meeting? It's pretty diverse. Was it like this 5 years ago? Yes. Was it like this 10 years ago? Okay, good for y'all. So what does community mean to you? So what's your community? What are some of the common communities that we belong to? Like, how do we find commonalities? So, your colleagues. If you take students or if you're in academia, other preceptors and educators, being a healthcare professional. So these are some of the common communities that we belong to. Some of the unique communities, so being a parent, people love to talk about their kids. I love to talk about my kids. But being a parent, your faith-based community. And so for me, I work at Campbell, and we are a faith-based university, and that was something that was important to me because my faith is something that's very important to me. So being able to work somewhere where I can tell my students, hey, I'm going to pray for you, or just being in that environment of faith is really important to me and helps to foster foster my faith in other areas as well. And then culture-based communities. So what cultural events do you participate in? Whether it's you go to the Italian Heritage Festival every year, or you go to, the Black History Month kickoff celebration every year, or, what are those things? You go to Oktoberfest. So what are the culture-based celebrations that you participate in? And is there anybody that you would like to invite or include? And so, just thinking about those things and how can you help make someone else more culturally competent? For example, one of my friends is Chinese, and they celebrate Chinese New Year. And we were over at their house hanging out, and it was like Chinese New Year. And he was like, oh, hey, I've got something for the kids. And he was like, it's a tradition for us to give red envelopes to children for Chinese New Year. And I'm like, oh, how nice. And so he gives my children these beautiful red envelopes, and they're playing and everything. And we get home, and I'm like, oh, let's open the envelopes that Uncle Dennis gave us. And I open this envelope. It's got $10 in it. I'm like, oh, hey, I just thought it was going to be like a nice card, like something pretty. I'm like, oh, y'all out here giving money to the children for Chinese New Year. So that was a cultural thing that I learned about, and the kids were very excited because they each have a piggy bank. And so they're like, oh, we're going to put this money in our piggy bank. I had no idea there was money in that envelope. I just thought it was something that was, that was just really pretty. But I learned something about culture that day. And so just, involving people in your culture. Other things, like what are the things that you like Star Wars enthusiasts, foodies, those sorts of things, gamers, being able to, understand and identify your own personal culture, your personal community, and thinking about, how does that impact our experience in the workplace? So you take your culture, you take your community with you wherever you go. And you never know what somebody's community is just by looking at them. So just by looking at me, do you think I have ever been fishing? Yes. Do you think I've ever been deer hunting? Yes, because I'm telling you, so obviously the answer is yes. But I'm from West Virginia, and so my dad is like, we grew up going fishing, deer hunting. One of my colleagues, I'll ask him, in the fall, I'm like, have you gotten your first deer yet? Oh yeah, here's my trail cam, blah, blah, blah. And our students are looking at us like, are they having a conversation about deer hunting? And it's like, yeah, I know all the things. And so, but you never know what somebody's culture is until you get to know them. But Appalachia and the hunting and the fishing and, being out in the woods and having a taxidermy deer head in your living room, like that's part of my culture. So, but it's not something, that's more of a deep culture for me. It's not a surface culture. Like you can't look at me and say, oh yeah, she looks like she can fish. So just learning about each other and, being able to share things will really enrich your experience in the workplace too. So culture is like an iceberg. So there are the things that you can see, the things that are pretty clear when you look at someone, and the things that you can't see. So learning about those, knowing that, there's a whole list of things that are different for people. Facial expressions, religious beliefs, foods, lots of culture revolves around food because we all love to eat. And so, having that culture where you are willing to share. For example, our neighbors 3 doors down are Indian, and our girls play together. And they invited us over for dinner a few weeks ago. And I was like, oh, yeah, because I love Indian food. And I was really happy about it. And my husband, who is from Missouri, was like, and I'm thinking, is he going to behave and try this food since we are over these people's house? Or like, what is he going to do? Because he is also a very picky eater, like just in general. And so I was just kind of curious, but he tried everything, and I was really proud of him because that was a big stretch for him. But it kind of also tickled me because I was like, you're going to behave yourself because we're at somebody else's house, but at our house, you're like, well, I'm not going to eat this, I'm not going to eat that. But anyway, so concept of self, work ethic is different for different cultures, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, some people are workaholics. Some people are more oriented towards their family and all of the things that happen after work. And so it's good to have a balance. Styles of dress, literature, concepts of fairness can vary from culture to culture, and child raising beliefs can vary from, within families even. So just understanding that there are lots of things that you see and that you don't see. And then here's another iceberg. So how do our colleagues identify? What are the things that we can clearly see? What are the things that are less obvious? How do we better engage them? How do we represent our communities? How do we prepare ourselves for the people that we're going to serve? And so there are those things that you can see easily and the things that you can't see. So just understanding that there are different parts of culture, and also, being able to educate people on your culture. And a story that I like to tell a lot is, so I did my residency in Eastern Kentucky. And we had 2 Muslim pharmacists there who were really nice and very, very dedicated to educating us about their culture, which I loved. And so they were really good about letting people know. Like, the first time that I met our one pharmacist, Muhammad, who now works in Dubai, in this fabulous place, he said, "It's so nice to meet you. I'm sorry I can't shake your hand. It's part of our culture for those of us who are married. The only woman that we will touch is our wife. It's part of our marriage vows." I'm like, "Oh, that's fine." And, and he was a wonderful preceptor and mentor to me and just a great person. But having him educate me was really helpful, because how many of y'all have heard that stereotype that Muslim men don't like women or are biased against women? And so there's that stereotype out there. But when he told me why he wasn't going to shake my hand, I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's fine." Well, a few years later, I was back in West Virginia at West Virginia University Hospitals, and we were doing residency interviews. And one of the candidates came in, and and we were an interview panel. He shook the men's hands, but he just, waved to the women. Well, I could tell that my colleague down at the end of the table was furious. She was furious during this guy's entire interview. And I knew why he didn't shake my hand. But she was angry because he didn't explain. And so after he left, she was like, "Oh my gosh, did you see how he just completely ignored all the women in the room?" And I was like, "Okay, Joy." He had a ring on his finger. I'm pretty sure he's probably married. And in Muslim culture, they won't touch any other woman besides their wife, even to shake hands. And she was like, "Oh, he was just being faithful to his wife? That's fine with me." So educating people is important. It makes for a better workplace. If you are someone who prays 5 times a day, putting that out there up front instead of it being, "Well, he's just disappearing all the time." So being able to, represent your culture and being in a place where you are comfortable is really important. And being in a place where you can be yourself is important. And those are important things to, when you are interviewing, making sure that you get to a place that is inclusive. When you are hiring, making sure that you are a place that is clearly inclusive and is going to attract a diverse workplace. So how do we respect each other's communities? So cultural sensitivity, the ability to be open to learning about and accepting different cultural groups, and then cultural competence, respecting that diversity and cultural factors, being able to understand, communicate, and effectively interact with people across cultures. So being able to respect their needs, being able to be open and understanding, those are the things that we need to do. And the way that we make this all work, this is one of my favorite concepts too, is cultural humility. So this is also defined by the National Institutes of Health as a lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique, whereby the individual not only learns about another's culture, but one starts with an examination of her or his own beliefs and cultural identities. And this is something that is a lifelong process. Even as someone who does a ton of DEI work, I mess up occasionally. Like I was at a birthday party. My daughter went to her friend's little birthday party, and so there were a bunch of her kids from her class. And I was talking to one of the parents, and we were talking. She was there on her own, and I said, "Oh, and my husband and I were there together, and both of our kids." And I remember specifically saying something about your husband, and she but she paused, but then she just sort of ignored it. Well, then later I noticed that, on pickup, this little girl has two moms. And I did not say your partner. And I'm thinking, I'm supposed to be culturally competent. And here I am, in my mom's shoes, saying something that was not inclusive. So, at work, I would not have done that. I would have said partner. But, in mom life, I said husband. And so that's something that, is all about that cultural humility and the continuum of cultural competence. So just understanding that you're going to slip up, it's okay, and just continuing to work towards those things. So just, it's a process. So just kind of thinking about this. So what obstacles or barriers might people from underrepresented groups face in the workplace? So what obstacles or barriers? Okay, yeah, the feeling of being alone. Anything else? Judgment or fear of judgment. And so maybe not necessarily feeling comfortable being completely yourself because of that fear that there isn't anybody like you, that you are the only person. So fear of judgment, that fear of being alone, feeling excluded because people are talking about their kids and you don't have children, or you've struggled, you wanted children, but you weren't able to have children. People talking about their husband or their wife when you have a partner, those sorts of things. People talking about their culture, but you maybe not feeling comfortable talking about your culture, those sorts of things. So it can create, some obstacles and barriers and make people feel, a little left out. How can these barriers impact work experience or performance? Less able to share ideas with other members of your team. Poor work performance because maybe you don't feel understood. Maybe work is not a place that feels welcoming to you for any number of reasons. So maybe you're not motivated to do your best because it's just not your happy place. And so understanding and being able to meet people where they are so that they're able to enjoy their work more. So how do we do that? So how do we create an atmosphere of belonging? So make it clear on the first day and every day. And this is something that I do with my students as well. So recognizing that we're all here to achieve a common goal. Acknowledge your colleagues' right to a positive work environment. So for me, with our students, a lot of times our students feel like they're in the way, especially in a hospital setting, especially in a busy hospital. Sometimes they just feel like they're in the way. And so on the first day, I say, everyone who is here has been a student at some point in time. They have been in your shoes as a learner. It's what we have to do in order to get to where we are. So they may not remember that sometimes, but you have just as much of a right to be here as anybody else. Do not let anybody feel like you are, make you feel like you are in the way unless you are physically in the way. Like if there is a code and you are standing in front of the door and people are trying to get it, just move. Those sorts of things, don't block hallways, stuff like that. But really, look people in the eye, introduce yourself, say, hi, I'm a pharmacy student. I'm going to be here this month. So, doing that. And I found that on days when I don't feel so great or I'm somewhere new, the thing that helps me to feel better is introducing myself to people and being more engaging. And then also acknowledging your colleagues' right to a positive work environment. And that's so important. And then getting to know each other, asking questions that are engaging but not intrusive, and also being willing to share yourself. So these are some of the questions that I like to ask when I'm new in a place, when I'm interviewing somewhere, when I'm, this is my favorite interview question. And I tell all of our students, as I'm mentoring them through their job interview process during their 4th year, what do you like most about working here? This is the best question to ask during an interview because it is so telling. Because if it's a wonderful place to work and somebody says, what do you like most about working here? They're going to have something immediately. And so you should ask everybody because you want to hear it and you want to hear like whether or not people are happy. And you should think about this in your own job now. What do you like most about the place that you're working? What makes it a place where you're happy? This is a really good question because if there aren't good things about working in this place, people are going to hesitate. They're going to think about it. They might frown a little. They might look at their co-interviewers and be like, well, we weren't ready for this question. Strange things happen when it's not a good, positive working environment when you ask this question. The other thing about this question is if it is a wonderful place, this is the last question that you ask them, it ends your interview on a positive note. It's giving them a chance to, brag about their institution, about their department. And so it ends your interview on a positive note. And that makes them look more favorably on you as a candidate. So that is my slam dunk interview question. So if you know anybody who's interviewing for anything, it's a great piece of advice. That and interview on a Friday. Because it's Friday, everybody's happy. So that's my other piece of interview advice. So how is your family? This is okay to ask. Everybody's got some kind of family. So asking how is your family is okay. What was the best part of your weekend? I ask my students this every Monday. Every Monday I say, what was the best part of your weekend? And, sometimes they're like, well, I got to catch up on sleep because they had to be there at 7:00 in the morning. And for them, it's just not good. It's a struggle sometimes. So what was the best part of your weekend? Which is, that allows people to share what they want to share. It's an open-ended question. If they don't want to share their business with me, they don't have to. They can say, well, I ate something really good, or, I got some sleep. Or they can say, well, I went home and visited my parents, and, these are the things that we did, and, this, that, and the other. And then being willing to share yourself. So I'll share, what the best part of my weekend was too. And then this is an exercise that one of my colleagues does for our students. It's called Picha Kucha. It's also good for people who are new to a workplace or people who are, just getting to know people. It's Japanese for chit chat. It's 20 slides, and it's 20 seconds per slide. And it's just a picture, and then you talk about it. And then another picture, and you talk about it. And so it's all about, getting to know someone, but it's really quick and fun. And here's a little Wikipedia about how to put together Picha Kucha. It can be all pictures. It can be pictures and words. But listening actively. This is so important. Following up with people, actively listening to them, asking follow-up questions. I am always surprised when I see someone like a few days later and they're like, hey, how was this, that, and the other? I'm like, oh, you were really paying attention to what I was saying. So ask those follow-up questions. Show that you care. It's going to create a better work environment, and it doesn't take a ton of effort. And then also recognizing boundaries and barriers as well, but creating that environment where you're not asking people like questions that feel intrusive, asking questions that are open-ended and inclusive. So now we're going to get into some scenarios. I've got about 20 minutes-ish. So what would you do? So you are a community pharmacy technician at a busy store, and you have a new colleague named Ola. She's from Cameroon and is fluent in both French and English. Ola has been a technician for 15 years and transferred from another store within your corporation. It's the middle of the month, and Ola is giving vaccines. So here in North Carolina, our pharmacy technicians are also able to get certified to vaccinate. So it's the middle of the month, and Ola is giving vaccines. How many of y'all have vaccination for technicians? Okay, great, awesome. So this is something that really just came up as a necessity with COVID for us in North Carolina. But our pharmacists and pharmacy technicians are able to get certified to vaccinate. I actually just got certified to vaccinate last year. We certify all of our students in pharmacy school, but in North Carolina, there wasn't ability for our pharmacy technicians to get certified. So that's something that the board was able to do because, we're vaccinating anybody. I'll vaccinate anybody. My hospital will give me like a little care package of COVID vaccines, and I have vaccinated people in parking lots. I vaccinated all the teachers at my children's daycare. That was selfish of me. I was just trying to keep daycare open. That only helped so much. So then I vaccinated all the parents. But we do have a lot of freedom to allow for things to change quickly here in North Carolina. And it's really important for us to advocate for our technicians. So that's why this scenario, we've got a technician who's vaccinating. And one of your regular patients, Mr. Smith, is there for a flu shot. And you overhear him saying, I've never seen your face in here before. You look over and you see that Mr. Smith has a skeptical look and Ola seems uncomfortable. She tells him that she is a pharmacy technician and a certified vaccinator. Mr. Smith then says, I like your accent. Where are you from? Jamaica? So what are your concerns in this situation and what would you do? This probably happens about 10 times a day. This is actually based on a story that my sister told me. So this is based on a real scenario. So what would you do? So this is your new colleague, and one of your regulars has just kind of thrown a little shade and is maybe not being as welcoming as they possibly could be. Right, exactly. So you're going to come alongside her and introduce them and, establish that she belongs there and help to kind of facilitate your patient being inclusive and understanding. So since you said this happens about 10 times a day, what do you do? Okay.
Secondly, I will give Mr. Smith credit because he said, I like your accent. That's far better than other things.
Yes, this is true. That is far better than other things that could be said or things that could not be said. Yes. So what comes up, comes out. That's very true. Mm-hmm. Yes. Right. can be saying the most horrible thing and think that that's normal. And this happens everywhere. This happens at home. This happened at my house last weekend. My mother-in-law, whom I adore, by the way, she really is very sweet. She was talking about Indian food because they work. She also has some Indian colleagues, and I don't even know how we got to talking about this. And she's like, and they smell like their food, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you are not my mama. And I could see my mom also saying something like this, because she's still working her way through the continuum of cultural competency as well. But if it was my mom, I'd be like, Ma, you can't say that. Like, that's not okay. We probably smell different to different people as well. Everybody smells different based on what they eat. But, this is not my mama. And so I can't say anything to her. And I'm like hurting a little inside. And my friend Beth looks at my mother-in-law and says, well, to other cultures, we smell like cheese. Because Americans eat so much more cheese than most cultures. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is why we've been friends for such a long time. You stood in the gap and checked my mother-in-law because I can't check her like that. And she just smoothed everything over, and it was so good. And I needed that because, it was like a no stakes situation for her, but it was a high stakes situation for me. So being able to stand in the gap, being able to understand where that person is coming from and meet them where they are is important too. So you say, from Mr. Smith's perspective, it is scary to get a vaccine from somebody that you don't know and somebody that is new. And I've been in that situation too. It's time for my children to get their COVID vaccinations. My son just turned 3 last weekend. My daughter turned 5 last month. I've been, I wanted to wait so they could both get vaccinated at the same time. And now their birthdays are over, and we've kind of had a lull in the kid crud that goes around. And so it's all right, it's time to get them their shots. And I did not want to just go to anywhere. So I posted on Facebook, hey, who of my Campbell trained pharmacist friends has Pfizer vaccine for my babies? And, posted a picture of them too. So I'm particular about who vaccinates my children. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
We can do the best job that we know how to do, and we might make a mistake.
Absolutely.
So it's in our best interest that the customer is aware,
Mm-hmm.
and that the customer has trusted us, and the customer has enough self-confidence to ask a question if they see something that maybe doesn't seem just right.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And that, to me, is a reasonable question for the customer to ask. We're all, I tell my students, we're all wearing name tags. You are one phone call away.
Mm-hmm.
Being called out by name. I think the customer should know your name. But that brought the technician to a higher level of awareness, and in that moment, it felt very threatening.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a tone that comes into that. It's kind of that, there have been times where you said, oh, what's your name? And then other times where you said, what's your name? So, just kind of trying to. Mm-hmm.
But as a technician, it can feel scary.
Absolutely. And, there are those situations where you've had an interaction with someone in the workplace where you feel like maybe they judged you in a way. Like when I first started practicing, I started out in geriatrics as a pharmacist. So I'm 25 and taking care of, 65, 75-year-old people who are trusting me to manage their blood thinning medication. And some of them were very skeptical. And then one of my patients, who became one of my very favorite patients, because this is a telephone-based service. And so, I met my patients, during their clinic appointments and then managed them over the phone, throughout the year. And so one of my patients, when he first met me, he said, I knew you were young because you sounded young, but I didn't realize you were this young. But he said it in like this really pleasant way that was super sweet, and it made me feel good and trusted. But it's just all about, how does the way that you say what you say make someone feel? And how can we stand in the gap when someone says something that makes someone else feel uncomfortable? And there's one more scenario where we talk about, if someone says something that makes someone else feel uncomfortable. So here's another, what would you do? So, and this is also these are all based on real scenarios. So you're the pharmacy technician supervisor at a large hospital, and you've invited a candidate named Alexandria to interview for an open position. Her resume shows 10 years of experience, and you have been looking forward to her interview. She arrives wearing gender-neutral clothing and says that you can call her Alex. This is like a stock photo. How might bias impact the candidate's interview experience or the evaluation of the candidate? So what sort of bias may happen in this situation? Okay, she can be perceived as being a man dressed as a woman. What else? Yes? Usage of the wrong pronouns. Yes. What else? She doesn't look like somebody that's been working for 10 years. So back to the age thing. And for me, because I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, I am much older than the average mom of a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. So age is something that I'm very conscious about when I'm, in my mom life, because my kids' moms are the mothers of my children's friends are all probably a good 10 years younger than me. So, that's something that might come into play as well. Some feelings about age, feelings about gender, bias towards, okay, is this person going to be a problem? Like, is the way that they dress going to be a problem? Are they going to make other people uncomfortable? Like, these are the things that the biases that can come in when someone comes in who's not like everybody else. And then the fact that challenges your cultural competency. Like, do you know, what are their pronouns? Things like that. How do you mention that in a way that is inclusive and non-judgmental? So, those biases and that fear that, oh, we've got somebody who's different and we're going to have to act different could impact your ability to see this person's skills, their talent, and what they can contribute to your organization. And this is something that is based on a situation. One of my advisees, who's a wonderful student with impeccable grades, she prefers to dress in a more masculine style. And towards the end of her 3rd year, she came to me and she said, Dr. Wente, I'm just really worried about going on rotations because I don't like to wear like feminine cut clothing. I like to wear more masculine cut clothing. And she's tall. She played basketball all throughout college. And she's a tall person. She usually wears, more masculine style clothes. And I said, well, you have got to be yourself. because you can't be anybody else, and it's going to be a barrier to your learning experience if you have to worry about what you're wearing and how that's perceived. And so be yourself. If you want to wear, khakis and a button-up shirt, that's fine. If you want to wear, professional shoes that are comfortable to you, that's fine. You have to figure out what that looks like for you, and you have to go out and feel that you are, comfortable and professional. And anyone who doesn't accept you, that is on them. And so when she went to apply for residencies, one of the things that she mentioned in her letters was that she is very interested in working in diversity, equity, and inclusion and serving LGBTQ plus patients. And so this is something that she put out there. She's being herself, and she didn't get any interviews in the first round of the residency match. And so I was talking with her partner, who is a year behind her in school, and she said, she's just really discouraged because she didn't get any interviews. Okay, we got 10 minutes. So good. We're good on time. So, I don't know what to tell her about how to approach the second round, because we have 2 rounds of interviews, because sometimes people don't get matched the first time, and so they do a second match. And she said, well, I thought about telling her to take out some of the, DEI and LGBTQ plus things in her letter. I was like, no, I thought about that too as her advisor, and I decided that was not the way to go, because she needs to find a place who knows her and accepts her the way that she is. Otherwise, she doesn't want to be there. It's not just that they don't want her, she's not going to want them either. And she's going to end up in a place where she's not happy. And so, I advise her, just keep doing what you're doing, and you're going to find the place that's a fit for you. And sure enough, during the second match, she found a great program, and she's very happy. I just texted her last week, and she's great. So you have to allow people to be themselves. You have to create an environment where that is okay. Whether it's that your institution, promotes people using their pronouns on their email signature. For us at Campbell, our PA school sold pronoun pins. And so I wear my pronoun pin on my lab coat, so everybody knows, hey, these are my pronouns. I have a diversity hand sticker that is on my laptop, and then I have a rainbow heart sticker that's also on my laptop. Those stickers are also on my nameplate at my door in my office at Campbell, and I also have stickers in my workplace too, in my office at the hospital. So just those things, because people have shared that when they see those inclusive symbols, it makes them more comfortable. So if you are an interviewer, being able to show that you are inclusive in any way, shape, or form is going to make your candidates more feel more welcome. And if you are in the process of creating a more diverse workforce, these are the things that you need to do. You need to be able to show that this is important to you, because it's not just going to happen organically. So this is our last or our next to last scenario. So you're the lead technician at Independent Community Pharmacy. You were out on Friday for a doctor's appointment, and Gary, a semi-retired technician, comes to fill in. When you return on Monday, a new technician named Michelle pulls you aside and asks if Gary works there frequently. It's clear that she's worried, and so you ask her if everything was okay on Friday. Michelle relates to you that Gary was wearing a Let's Go Brandon mask. How many of y'all know what this is about? Some of y'all. Okay. So this is a very politically charged thing. So Gary was wearing a Let's Go Brandon mask and talked about the dangers of vaccines all day, which made her uncomfortable. So what would you do? How does Gary's behavior reflect on your pharmacy? Badly. How could this impact your professional relationships? What now? What's a Let's Go Brandon mask? So I will encourage you to Google it because there's a little profanity involved. But it's a politically charged message. Yes, it's very political. And so, and in the past, the past 5 years or so, our political climate has changed a lot. And so we get people who are, I heard some O's over there. They got on there and Googled some things. So, people have been more emboldened to voice their views in the workplace, which is not necessarily appropriate. So, how do you address that? How do you address colleagues who are bringing politics into the workplace? How do you make sure that you do continue to have an inclusive workplace? And how do you, discourage those types of behaviors that make other people feel excluded? So, and then, making sure that everybody stays professional. So any other comments, questions? Y'all can Google "Let's Go Brandon." And this was actually a story that was shared with me by one of my colleagues. So this is based on a real scenario as well. This is the last one. So you're a medication reconciliation technician at a large hospital. Today you're training 2 pharmacy interns to work on admission and discharge med rec. Intern A worked up a patient who's supposed to be discharged this afternoon, did a very thorough job, but then concludes with, it doesn't really matter what we do because the patient keeps coming back to the hospital because he clearly doesn't care about his health. He also doesn't have a job or insurance and isn't going to take these meds anyway. That's very bad. Intern B immediately starts to shift in their chair and looks uncomfortable. So, what impact might this have on the patient's care? They might die because this intern is not really dedicated to fostering medication adherence for this patient. How's that going to impact the other intern? Right, it might influence who wants to work with this person who is judgmental. How would you handle this situation as their supervisor? Right. Encourage them to find out what barriers this person has. Encourage them to find out what resources we have in our community to help this person. Instead of just judging them, saying, okay, well, these are the resources that we have. This is how we can help this person. I want you to come with me while we help this patient get what they need and see how grateful they are, or, just helping to dispel them of this notion. So what else? So just figuring out, how do you handle this situation? What if intern B, this patient represents most of their family? Maybe they have family members who don't have a job, who don't have health insurance due to, unforeseen life circumstances. People get laid off. People lose jobs. People lose insurance. It doesn't mean that they're a bad person, that they're a lazy person. It doesn't mean they don't care about their health. They just may not have the means and the resources. So this is something that we think about and see a lot, especially in our area, patients who just don't have the money. We had a patient a couple of weeks ago who was spending $400 on a medication, and we had gone in and talked to him about his meds, and he's like, hey, I have exhausted all my resources. I've gotten all the samples and all the drug company help, and this is costing me $400 a month. We had to really work hard to convince the cardiologist to switch him to a less expensive medication because they weren't really seeing the full picture. And finally I said, this man is going to stop taking this. It's costing him $400 a month. They are raising 2 teenagers. So this patient was 70-something, but had 2 teenagers that he and his wife were raising. He is going to stop taking this and prioritize his family. If you don't switch him to a less expensive medication, there's going to be a problem. So, yes. So this is a good question. So I'm the pharmacist saying this. As a lead tech, how comfortable would you be confronting the provider? And so this is another thing that I really like about the place that I work now. I work in a smaller hospital, and everybody really recognizes the value of everyone else's roles. And so if you are in an institution where a physician is looking at you and telling you that, and not respecting you and your place in patient care, then that's an institutional thing that needs to be addressed. Because for us, everybody speaks to everybody. Everybody understands and recognizes that we are all there for a common goal. So being able to say, I'm just trying to help this patient. I know that you want what's best for them, and so do I, is the place to bring that back around to. So it's a good question. All right. Is that my time? Okay. Thank y'all. This was fun. And Paula knows how to find me. So always.